All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a major developing story out of Minneapolis that has pretty much ignited a firestorm across the country, touching on everything from law enforcement to immigration to our deep political divisions. So here's the headline, the event that kicked this all off. In the early hours of the morning, an Army veteran was shot and killed by federal immigration agents.
And this wasn't just some anonymous person. His name was Alex Pretti. He was only 32 years old. And get this, on top of being a veteran, he worked as an ICU nurse, a frontline healthcare worker. These details are absolutely crucial because they immediately shaped how the public saw this whole thing.
So the big question is, what actually happened? Well, that is where this whole story just gets incredibly complicated. Let's start with the official side of things, what the federal authorities are saying. Okay, so the agents were from the Department of Homeland Security. They say they were in the middle of an immigration enforcement operation. Their official line is that when they approached Pretti, he resisted arrest and, this is the key phrase, brandished a firearm. And that, they claim, is what prompted them to open fire. But that official story, it almost immediately started to come apart under scrutiny. It really all boils down to this one single question. Yeah, because a bunch of key details just don't seem to line up with that official narrative. For starters, initial reports from the scene, they never confirmed a weapon was even found. Then there's the body camera footage, which could clear everything up, but guess what? It still hasn't been released. Now the agents are on standard administrative leave, but here's another twist. A video has surfaced showing Pretti in a separate scuffle with agents just 11 days before this. I mean, that just adds a whole other layer of complexity here. And you have to understand, this didn't happen in a vacuum. The story, with all these holes and unanswered questions, it just exploded. The public reaction on the ground in Minneapolis was, well, it was powerful and it was immediate. Yep, almost right away, this shooting fueled massive protests all across the city. People poured into the streets. They were demanding answers, demanding accountability. The feeling was that this was a clear case of excessive force. And what really amplified the tension was the fact that this wasn't some isolated one-off event. This was actually the second fatal shooting involving federal agents in the city recently. Another person, Renee Macklin Good, had also been killed. So for many people living there, this felt like a pattern, a pattern that was creating a lot of fear and mistrust. So, as you can imagine, a story this explosive didn't stay local for long. It shot onto the national stage, becoming a real political flashpoint, and frankly, exposing just how divided the country really is on these issues. And what this whole incident really does is throw two completely opposite views on immigration enforcement into sharp relief. On one side, you have supporters of the administration's policies. They argue you need strong enforcement for border security, period. But on the other side, you have the critics who are saying, look, these aggressive tactics, they're putting innocent lives at risk, and they're destroying any trust between communities and federal authorities. The response from the White House was, well, it was complex. President Trump actually noted that Pretti was legally carrying a gun, which is a pretty big deal, right? It seems to confirm a key fact from Pretti's side. But at the same time, while he's calling for an honest inquiry, he's also labeling some local ICE detainees as vicious criminals. So a very mixed message. And then, in stark contrast, you have the local congresswoman, Ilhan Omar. She did not mince words. She called the entire federal immigration operation terrorizing for her community, directly connecting the agents' actions to what she called hateful rhetoric. And it wasn't just her. The calls for accountability started coming from all over. You had Minnesota's own governor, Tim Walz, criticizing the federal government's approach. At the national level, Democrats started calling for the resignation of the Homeland Security Secretary. And even some Republicans were getting nervous, pushing back on the optics and the tactics being used. Okay, so with all of this turmoil, the protests, the political firestorm, where does this all go from here? What are the actual concrete steps being taken to get some answers and hopefully some accountability? Well, right now, there are basically three separate investigations kicking off. First, you've got the federal authorities doing their own internal review. But, and this is really crucial, you also have local prosecutors looking at this to see if the agents should face actual criminal charges. And on top of all that, Congress is stepping in to provide a third layer of oversight with hearings and demands for information. And it really seems like all that public pressure is actually working. The White House has already signaled it might adjust its enforcement strategies in Minnesota after meeting with state officials. That is a really clear example of how these local events can have a direct impact on national policy. And
All of this, it really leaves us with one big essential question. This one incident in Minneapolis forces all of us to ask, in the push for security and enforcement, at what point does a community start to feel like it's under siege? When enforcement and the community collide, where do you draw the line?